Despite defying expectation, Russia still occupies about 1/5 of Ukrainian territory, and Kyiv is warning that Russia is readying a major new offensive. Petro Poroshenko served as president of Ukraine from 2014 to 2019. He is in Kyiv. Mr. Poroshenko, it's good to talk to you again.
Thank you very much indeed. Happy to hear you.
What's your sense of where things stand right now, a year into this war?
You are absolutely right. This is the 9 years war. And today is 365th day of the Russian 3 days war. And our Western partners said that it would be about 7 days. But me, who create the Ukrainian armed forces since year 2014, based on the NATO standard, very well trained, well equipped, we definitely, I count on our armed forces, and we definitely have the best negotiator with Putin. Those who said that we should have a negotiation, my recommendation, the best negotiator to Putin is Ukrainian armed forces. And we negotiate to throw Putin away from Kyiv, because exactly 1 year ago from this place, it was 3.5 kilometers to the Russian troops. And within first hour after Russian missiles attacked the place near my house, we were here, and within 5 hours here was more than 1,000 people, volunteers, who waiting with the weapons in the hands to stop Russia on the border of Kyiv. And I'm proud that we are the first, the battalion of the territorial defense who stay on the border of Kyiv and take responsibility on us. And me, with the weapons in the hands, was together with them.
You say your armed forces are negotiating with Russia right now. There are no peace talks, but your government is negotiating with the West and NATO to try to get fighter jets. Poland has said it will send some MiGs if the West agrees to send its fighter planes as well. How important is it for you to get those jets, and do you think NATO and the Allies will eventually honor and meet that request?
First of all, we have, as a former Supreme Commander-in-Chief Ukrainian Armed Forces, I can tell you, weapon is never enough. Point number two, we have enough weapons to withstand with Putin, to stop them. And we have absolutely not enough weapons to provide immediate, very urgent offensive operation. And for that, every single month's delay would cost us thousands of lives and thousands of efforts, and we simply continue the life of the Putin. And with that situation, we definitely need most urgent armed personnel carrier, tanks. We need it minimum for 12 brigade. We need air defense system. We need long-range missile, then radio electronic warfare system, and we need very, very, very urgent ammunition. We have a lack of ammunition, and without ammunition, this is impossible to provide an effective fight with Russia. And definitely, we need F-16. But I'm happy to have the news that in some nation, the Ukrainian pilots learn, train to the F-16. But we need all I said now in March. We think that delay for the half of the year completely changed the structure of the war. And I want to thank very special thanks to the Canada, to your Prime Minister, to Christia, to your Minister of Foreign Affairs, with her I met in Munich and here in Kyiv. And with all this situation, I'm proud that Canada is a leader for supplying us weapons, for supporting us, for introducing the sanction, and for presenting the financial support.
Are you satisfied with the level of military support from Canada, sir? I know Canada played a crucial role in the training of Ukrainian troops, but we're only able to provide 4 Leopard tanks, for instance, just because of the state of our armored reserves here. I mean, is that enough? Do you think Canada and other countries have met the bar so far?
First of all, I thank Canada. Second, we definitely need more. Third, please do not meter the level of support of Ukraine by Canada by only tanks. I said that we, more than tanks, need the long-range missile, anti-aircraft missile, and the armed personnel carrier. With that situation, I am very much proud the Canadian leadership. And another thing which is vital for Ukraine is support Ukrainian aspiration to be a NATO member state. And with this situation, me, as a president of Ukraine, change Ukrainian constitution, put NATO in the constitution as an obligatory for any Ukrainian authorities. And I really count on Canada to support our future membership. Better if we can do that on the NATO summit in Vilnius on July this year. At least we count to receive an invitation. Please learn the word, invitation for Ukraine to NATO.
Vladimir Putin has extended an invitation to China's top diplomat to come to Moscow. We saw that happen yesterday. He also gave a significant speech which had a wartime feel to it. How concerned are you, sir, of China, speaking of the importance of a strategic relationship with Russia, and the United States warning China that it has intelligence that China may be poised to provide military aid to Russia in the forms of lethal aid and equipment? What concerns do you have there?
I cannot call Putin's speech as a significant. It was boring speech of the person who don't know what to do. He start afraid. With this situation, I doubt that he can count on the China support. Tomorrow, we will have a China proposal for peace. Again, I said, the best negotiator for peace is armed forces of Ukraine. Definitely, we need an open dialogue with China. And this is my position. I personally have several meetings with President Xi, and I know for sure that it is possible to have a discussion with them. We should have the whole world on our side, because Russia is an aggressor, Russia is an evil, Russia killing Ukrainian civilian victims by dozens of thousands, and nobody would be in one boat with Russia. Today, we have a General Assembly resolution in New York. And it would be interesting for me how many countries will stay on the Russian side and how many countries will support this resolution. And with this situation, the China and the whole world should insist we should protect the territorial integrity of Ukraine. The territorial integrity of Ukraine shouldn't be on the discussion. All other things after releasing Ukrainian territory for the security would be open. The article, it seems to me, Article 59 of United Nations Charter said that every nation who has a right for self-defense. We are just using their right. And I tell you that exactly 1 year ago, I was not a leader of the opposition, and I said to President Zelensky that you are not anymore my opponent. Both of us, all of Ukraine, are soldiers, and we demonstrate that the whole year.
But as this year rolls over and we move into the second year of, as you called it, Vladimir Putin's three-day war, if he can't count on China for support, and if his forces are unable to break through and he has no more reserves to call up, are you worried that he might potentially escalate things and use the weapons of mass destruction? There was some saber rattling this week when he pulled out of the nuclear arms treaty with the United States. Do you worry a desperate Putin might take that desperate step?
We are not afraid of nuclear weapons from Russia. Why? Because this has changed nothing. That would be a suicide for Putin. And I have no doubt that he definitely understands that. No matter who sent this signal, Chinese, Ukrainians, or Americans, no matter. With this situation, I have a few recommendations based on my personal experience for long negotiation with Putin. Please, don't trust Putin. even when he said about anything, don't trust. And point number two, please don't be afraid of Putin. Learn from Ukrainian experience. Learn from my experience during the first 5 years of this war. Don't be afraid of Putin. And Putin understands only one language, and this language is not Russian. This language is a language of force, a language of strength. And without that, Putin go as far as we together allow him to go. With that situation, we need to urgently need weapons. We urgently need sanction. We urgently need to have a steps for create the justice tribunal for Putin. We urgently need to arrest Russian gold in currency reserve and give it to reparation. And we definitely need to open the door of NATO for Ukraine. And with that situation, no matter China, India, the whole world would be on our side, because this is the Russia aggressor, this is the Russia kill the civilian, this is the Russia provide the military crime, and we do not give any tiny chance for Putin to win.
Petro Poroshenko, I want to thank you for your time.
Thank you very much indeed.
It's past midnight now in Ukraine, where 1 year ago Russia's invasion began, and Ukrainian officials are warning Russia may launch a new wave of attacks to mark it. The CBC's Murray Brewster is in Kyiv. So Murray, you spent the last few weeks in Ukraine, and where you are now, it actually is the anniversary of the invasion. So what's the atmosphere like there?
Well, David, I spent most of yesterday talking to senior security and defense officials with the Ukrainian government, trying to catch their mood. And one of the questions I asked them was, so what do you expect tomorrow? And one of the officials just looked at me and said, tomorrow is Friday. And that sort of sums up the way that the way they've been looking at it, and actually the way they've been treating things all week long. Like, for example, earlier this week when Russian President Vladimir Putin was giving his speech, his big speech, many Ukrainians were playing online bingo using some of his stock phrases and lining them up so that at one point they could cry bingo. So they're putting on a brave face, but there is an underlying tension, obviously. It is the anniversary. It is 1 year. And there have been air raid sirens throughout Kyiv during the daytime today. It's actually kind of quiet here this evening, knock on wood. Throughout the south, though, there are a number of air raid sirens. There's a lot of air activity down there in the Mykolaiv, in the Zaporizhia region, and no reports of hits, no reports of damage at this point. But this is still very much an active war. Now, while the Ukrainians have been sort of mocking the Russians and making fun of the Russians, part of the underlying tension here is about what China is going to say tomorrow in its peace plan. The Ukrainians are watching that very carefully because they know it's going to have an enormous impact on them, especially if China decides to lean more heavily towards Russia.
So, okay, I mean, the China thing is going to be a big development to watch more on this for sure. But you spent some time in Kherson, which was retaken from Russia last fall, but heavily bombed, including a hospital there, and you spoke to some of the staff. Well,
I was at the Children's Hospital in Kherson, and we were talking to 3 doctors who managed to save 5 children. And how they did it was by falsifying the medical records of those children. So essentially, during the occupation, the Russians would come and they would want these newborn babies, claiming that they were orphaned. But the doctors that we spoke to were saying that the children actually had parents. Some of those parents were serving in the Ukrainian military at the time. And what they did was, and it's an incredible story, they falsified the medical records. They even went as far as to stage hospital equipment around these children to make them look sicker than they actually were. And but it's a very, very emotional issue here, because that small little story at the Kherson Children's Hospital is part of a wider story that has been consuming Ukrainian society here, because there are literally thousands of children that have been taken to Russia and like some of them sent to re-education camps. This is something that is a matter of great social debate here. But we did speak to these doctors who really did risk life and limb to save at least 5 children. So incredible story, David.
Yeah, if they had been discovered, what they were doing had been discovered, the retaliation would have been severe, most likely.
Well, they were convinced that they were going to be arrested. In fact, on a couple of occasions they said it came close, because Russian occupation authorities would come into the hospital and they'd be talking to them and they'd be checking things out. But one of the doctors that spoke to us said that she was very relieved that none of those Russian officials were doctors, because a doctor would have been able to spot the ruse right away. And there were some pretty hairy times. In fact, one of the other things too is that the administration of the hospital was, at the time during the occupation, pro-Russian. So these doctors had to hide all of their activities from their own administration. And when the Russians pulled out, the administration of the hospital actually left with the Russians.
Murray, it's a remarkable story. I read it today on our webpage, CBCNews.ca, if you want to check it out there. But thanks for speaking to us again tonight from Kyiv. That's our Murray Brewster in Kyiv. Thanks, Murray.
You're welcome.
After 1 year of Russia's war, Ukraine is facing a humanitarian crisis that gets worse by the day. This is video from the heavily shelled city of Kherson in the south. Only 50,000 residents remain out of a pre-war population of 279,000. They're short on food, water, and medicine. Ukraine reclaimed the city last fall, but Russian forces remain on the outskirts, pummeling it daily with artillery. This week, the UN Human Rights Office released human costs of Russia's war. At least 8,000 civilians killed and more than 13,000 have been injured. The UN says these numbers are likely underestimated. A Canadian woman has a lead role in the humanitarian effort in Ukraine. Denise Brown is the United Nations resident coordinator in Ukraine, and with that, she is the body's highest-ranking diplomat working in the country. Denise Brown, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
We're coming up on 1 year since Russia's invasion. You've been in the country for 7 months. What are the most crucial needs on the ground right now in Ukraine?
It's absolutely clear that the communities living along the front line, close to the front line, with daily, sometimes hourly airstrikes, the loss of their homes, the loss of civilian infrastructure, energy, schools, clinics, that's where the needs are the greatest, and that's where we're spending a lot of our time right now, is really up close to the front line.
Can you possibly meet the demand for help, given the situation in the country right now?
The needs grow constantly as missiles fall, and people who didn't need assistance yesterday need it today. So there's constantly more that needs to be done.
And it keeps getting worse, right, because of the various layers. The number of children living in poverty in Ukraine has doubled. There are reports of constant sexual violence, millions of people displaced. I mean, how wide are the cracks in the safety net you're trying to craft there right now?
Well, there are many cracks. And first was the winterization, getting people through the winter, the more than 6 million people who are displaced, those who've lost their homes, those who are suffering from the psychosocial trauma of this war, the newly retaken areas, those who live along the front line. So there are many different cracks that we are trying to fill. And of course, as time goes by and those strikes intensify, which is what we've been seeing over the past couple of weeks, I'm here, I see it, I hear it, then just more and more needs to be done. And again, every single day there are new needs, people in new areas. Just look at what's happening in Kherson City, civilians killed last week in airstrikes. So it's a deepening and a widening of this crisis, particularly as time goes by.
So the UN will have access to Ukrainian-controlled territory, but I understand you can't get access to help Ukrainians in Russian-controlled territory. Is there any sign that perhaps Russia may relent on that and let you in, or does that feel like it simply is an insurmountable challenge?
I have many challenges to deal with here. None of them seem to me yet insurmountable. I'm going to keep harping on that one. with the support of the United Nations, with the Undersecretary General Martin Griffiths, so that we access all Ukrainians wherever they may need, wherever they are and whatever they need. So I'm not giving up on this one. I haven't yet had success, but I have to have hope, and I have hope left.
You're in Ukraine, you work for the United Nations, but you are a Canadian, you're from Vancouver. Canada has been a significant donor of financial aid and support, but the focus mostly in the conversation, Denise, has been on military aid. I just wonder, the eye-popping military support numbers, they seem to respond to the calls, if maybe a little bit slow, the West at times. How is the response on the humanitarian side, where the need must be equally, if not greater?
Well, it's a very important question because, first of all, as the war continues and as missiles fall on Ukrainians, then, of course, the needs are there. And so as military support is required, as long as there's a humanitarian crisis caused by this war, then we need that support to continue. And in 2022, it was excellent. I really have to thank the member states, including Canada, who's been just a huge supporter of the humanitarian response. We're going to need the same level of support for the people of this country who are living for.
You'd previously said that you will start looking at early recovery activities in appropriate areas starting, I guess, last month. I mean, agricultural investment, the restoration of social services. I heard from the Ukrainian ambassador about the problems with landmines in the agricultural areas of the country. I mean, has the work started? How much progress can you make on that, given the state of the conflict right now?
Well, it depends where in the country where we are talking about. In places like Mykolaiv, there is a demand actually from the local authorities, the regional authorities, that there is more support for recovery, as that front line has receded in Mykolaiv. So we're having discussions with them. In other places, we've been asked to assist with repairing water systems or sewer systems, rebuilding schools, rebuilding clinics, training, particularly trauma training for medical personnel. So we have an unprecedented situation where we have this huge humanitarian crisis and huge recovery needs in parallel, and trying to balance between the two. So these are the demands that are there because of the situation.
Most people will never see the front lines of what is happening there, and we see the images of, say, President Biden, for example, safely going into Kyiv and sort of this triumphant moment of support with President Zelensky. How does that compare? I mean, a year ago, it looked like Kyiv was going to be overrun by Russian forces, but how does that image of President Biden in Kyiv compare with what's happening in the rest of the country?
I can only talk about what I see on the front line, and I go regularly with the team to these communities, and there's not one word to describe the situation. I could say it's horrendous, it's appalling, it's abysmal, and it's all of those things and more. It sometimes can be very overwhelming to stand in a community that is now completely flattened. But there are always people there. They're typically elderly people who've stayed behind because this is their community. Mm. They were born there, they were raised there, they married there, they had children there. This is their home and they're not leaving. So while I feel quite emotional when I go to these places and sometimes, yes, a little overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the destruction, I always come away hopeful. Again, the word hope. Because of the determination and resilience of the Ukrainian people who stayed behind in their community. That's their community and they're not leaving. So we're there with them.
You've been there with them for about 7 months. I just wonder, how are you doing? I mean, it's been a hard year and you're doing hard, important work. How are you holding up on a personal level?
Well, the difference between myself and Ukrainians is that my family's not here. So I can only imagine, as a mother myself, the worry, the constant worry about your children here. When the air siren goes off, where are your children? What are they doing? And are they at school? So it's hugely difficult for the Ukrainians. Yes, it's true, it's difficult for us, but at least I'm here alone and don't have that additional worry that all the mothers around me have.
Yeah, well, I'm a dad myself, so that strikes home when you put it that way. Denise Brown, thank you so much for your work, and thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you too.